At my son's anniversary party, my daughter-in-law raised her glass and said, "Let's thank my husband for escaping his poor mother." The whole room burst into laughter. I smiled, but inside my chest was burning. What no one expected was that the very place they were standing in already belonged to me. Before I go on, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing your stories too. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 62 years old, and for most of my life, I worked as a school teacher. I raised my son Daniel after my husband passed away, and every sacrifice I made was so he could have a better future. When I received the invitation to Daniel and Samantha's anniversary party, I was nervous. I wanted to look nice without drawing too much attention. I picked out a simple navy dress I had saved for special occasions. The venue was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Tables were decorated with white roses, and soft music played as waiters carried trays of champagne. Everyone looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. I walked in quietly, trying not to look out of place, but I could feel people glancing at me. Some smiled politely, others whispered behind their hands. I spotted Daniel across the room. He looked so happy, dressed in a sharp suit, greeting guests with confidence. I walked up to him and gave him a quick hug. "You must be proud of all this," I said softly. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and replied, "It's all Sam's doing, Mom. She wanted it perfect." I nodded, but a small ache pressed against my heart. I wasn't upset, but I couldn't ignore the distance. He belonged to this new world now, one filled with glitter and noise, while I stood quietly on the side, hoping not to embarrass him. As the evening went on, I watched him laugh with friends, take pictures with Samantha, and raise glasses in celebration. I was proud of him, but I also felt invisible in that shining room. The party had been moving smoothly, with laughter and clinking glasses filling the room. I stayed near the back, not wanting to take up space or draw attention. That had always been my way, quiet, respectful, letting Daniel shine. I was sipping on a glass of sparkling water when I heard the familiar sound of glasses being tapped. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned toward the head table, where Samantha, my daughter-in-law, stood with a dazzling smile. Her sequined dress sparkled under the lights, and her confidence filled the entire room. "Everyone," she said in her clear, commanding voice, "I'd like to make a special toast." The crowd leaned in. Daniel looked at her lovingly, proud of his wife's poise. I expected words about their love, or maybe something about family, but instead, she turned her gaze toward Daniel and then swept it across the room with a smirk. "Let's raise our glasses," she said, "to my husband, who escaped his poor mother's life and built something of his own." The words hit me like a slap across the face. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then laughter erupted. Some people laughed loudly, others chuckled nervously, unsure if it was appropriate, but the sound spread like fire. I stood frozen. My hand gripped the glass tighter as my heart pounded. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, and yet, I smiled. It wasn't a real smile, just a thin mask to hide the sting. I didn't want anyone to see the pain. Inside it cut deeper than any insult I had ever endured. I remembered the nights I went to bed, hungry, so Daniel could eat a full meal. I remembered patching his clothes so he wouldn't feel ashamed at school. I remembered working long hours, tutoring after class, sewing on weekends, doing whatever I could to make sure he had every opportunity. And now, all of that was reduced to a cruel joke. A room full of strangers was laughing at my sacrifices, laughing at the woman who gave everything for her son. I looked at Daniel, hoping, praying, that he would stand up, put a stop to it, or at least acknowledge me. But he didn't. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair and gave a small, awkward smile, the kind people give when they want to move past an uncomfortable moment. My chest ached. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to remind everyone that without me, there would be no successful Daniel, no grand anniversary party, no glamorous Samantha married into this family. But I stayed silent, because if I spoke, I knew it would ruin the evening for Daniel, and the last thing I wanted was to be remembered as the bitter mother who spoiled their celebration. So I smiled, even as my eyes burned. The guests continued to laugh, raising their glasses high. Some looked at me briefly, their eyes darting away quickly with guilt or discomfort. Others didn't even glance my way. Samantha tilted her head back and sipped her champagne like she had just delivered the funniest joke of the night. I stood there, invisible yet exposed, mocked yet silent. In that moment, I felt a storm inside me. Part of me wanted to walk out and never come back, to leave them to their world and their arrogance. But another part of me whispered to stay, because sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpest response. As I looked at Samantha, basking in the laughter she had stirred, I thought about the kind of woman she had become. Sharp-tongued, proud, shallow. She had wealth, beauty, and confidence, but she had no kindness. And Daniel, my sweet boy, the child I had held in my arms, the teenager I had encouraged through every hardship, was too blind in love to see the cruelty in her words. I swallowed hard and steadied myself. The laughter began to fade as the toast ended. Samantha sat down, pleased with herself. Daniel kissed her cheek, and the crowd returned to their conversation. The music picked back up. Waiters poured more drinks, and the party rolled on as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. That single moment revealed where I stood in their eyes. To Samantha, I was an inconvenience, a shadow of the past she wanted her husband to forget. To the guests, I was a punchline, a story to laugh at over champagne. To Daniel, I was someone he loved, yes, but not enough to defend in the face of humiliation. I held on to my glass, still half full, and looked down at the bubbles rising and bursting at the surface. My life had been just like that, years of rising, struggling, pushing forward, only to vanish in a moment of mockery. Yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. A quiet strength stirred in me, reminding me that I was not as powerless as they thought. My silence was not surrender, it was patience. And patience, when the time is right, can be stronger than any words. So I stayed at that party, standing tall, even when I wanted to disappear. I stayed because I knew the story was not finished. And little did Samantha know, her words would come back to her in ways she could never imagine. The laughter from Samantha's toast faded, but the echo of it still rang in my ears. My smile stayed fixed, though inside, I was trembling. I placed my glass down on the nearest table and straightened my back. I reminded myself why I was here. It was Daniel's anniversary, not a battleground. I told myself to breathe, to let it pass, but I could feel something shift inside me. A quiet voice whispered that my silence was not weakness. It was strength, waiting for the right moment. I moved toward a corner of the room, away from the crowd. From there, I could watch everything without being in the spotlight. Guests mingled in little clusters, laughing, sipping champagne, and telling stories. Waiters glided by with trays of hors d'oeuvres. On the surface, it was a perfect evening, but I couldn't shake the sting of what had just happened. Every time I caught a glimpse of Samantha, her proud posture and smug smile made the wound deeper. Daniel walked by once, catching my eye. He hesitated for a second, like he wanted to say something, but then Samantha tugged on his arm and pulled him back into another group. My heart broke a little more, but I didn't let my face show it. I wasn't going to let anyone see me as fragile. The evening carried on with speeches, laughter, and music. I stayed quiet, observing, collecting myself. What no one knew, not Daniel, not Samantha, not a single person in that glittering room, was that I had quietly made an investment months before. I had saved for years, lived simply, and used every bit of wisdom I had to grow what little I possessed. I had purchased shares in the very company that owned this venue. It wasn't for status or revenge. It was because I wanted to secure something stable for my future, something I could one day pass to Daniel if he ever needed it. I never spoke of it. To most people, I was just a retired schoolteacher who lived in a modest house with a small garden. That image suited me. I didn't care for showing off or proving myself. But as I stood in that room, invisible in a sea of diamonds and designer gowns, I realized that sometimes keeping quiet allows people to underestimate you. And when they underestimate you, they make the mistake of thinking you can be trampled on without consequence. I knew the evening had a surprise announcement planned. I overheard one of the event coordinators earlier talking about how the host was going to introduce the new investor. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, after Samantha's cruelty, I felt my heart beating faster. because I knew exactly who that investor was. Me. The thought filled me with a strange mix of fear and calm. Fear because I had never been the center of attention in a glamorous setting like this. Calm because I wasn't doing it to humiliate anyone, even though part of me felt the sharp satisfaction of knowing what was about to unfold. I was doing it because the truth has a way of revealing itself, whether we speak it or not. The music lowered suddenly, and the host, a tall man with a booming voice and an effortless charm, took the microphone. He tapped it gently, and the room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate this beautiful couple. But before we continue, we have a special announcement." I felt my stomach tighten. I knew what was coming, and I braced myself. The host continued, smiling brightly. "As many of you know, this venue has gone through exciting changes. Tonight, we are honored to welcome a new investor, someone who has just purchased this entire property. Please give a round of applause for our newest partner." The room buzzed with curiosity. People whispered, turning in their seats, craning their necks to see who it might be. Samantha's eyes lit up, probably expecting another wealthy name she could cozy up to. Daniel clapped politely, unaware. Then the host's hand lifted and gestured toward me. "Everyone, let's welcome Evelyn Carter." The sound of my own name in that glittering room made me freeze for a second. Every head turned in my direction. Dozens of eyes locked on me. Phones rose, cameras flashing. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. I took a step forward, my knees steady, my chin high. I didn't rush. I didn't bow. I simply nodded, calm and composed. A murmur swept through the room. That was when I heard the sharp clink behind me. Samantha's champagne glass slipped from her hand, spilling golden liquid down the front of her sequined dress. Her face drained of color, as fast as the champagne drained from the glass. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Daniel's eyes widened, his hand frozen halfway through a clap. He looked from me to Samantha, then back at me, struggling to process what had just happened. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "That's his mother?" someone said. "The one she just mocked?" Another voice whispered. Laughter no longer filled the air. Instead, it was shock, curiosity, and something else. Respect. I stood there in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle. I didn't need to speak yet. My very presence was enough to turn the entire room upside down. And for the first time that evening, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. The room seemed to hold its breath. My name still echoed in the air as the host gestured toward me with that grand smile, inviting the applause to grow. But the sound that followed wasn't steady clapping. It was scattered, hesitant, uneven. Some people clapped politely, their eyes darting between me and Samantha. Others whispered in shock, hands covering their mouths. A few guests leaned toward each other with wide eyes, their voices just loud enough for me to catch fragments. "His mother? She owns this place? She's the one Sam just joked about. How humiliating." The words swirled around me, but instead of shrinking, I felt taller. For once, I wasn't standing in the shadow. Daniel was still frozen, his hands half apart, his face pale. He blinked at me as if trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew, his modest, simple mother, with the woman now revealed as the owner of the very venue he was celebrating. And Samantha, oh, Samantha, she stood stiff as stone, the champagne staining her sequined dress like an ugly scar. Her lips trembled, her proud eyes, which only minutes earlier sparkled with smug confidence, now darted frantically around the room. She could feel the weight of every gaze, every whisper, every camera pointed at her. The host handed me the microphone. My hands didn't shake. I didn't rush to speak. I let the silence work for me, because sometimes silence is louder than noise. When I finally brought the microphone close, my voice was calm, steady, and clear. "Thank you," I said simply. "But tonight isn't about me. Tonight is about celebrating Daniel and Samantha's marriage. I am grateful to be here as a mother, proud of the man my son has become, and I am grateful to see him building a life with someone he loves." The audience hushed, listening closely. I could see Samantha squirming, desperate for me to slip into bitterness or anger, but I didn't give her that satisfaction. I paused and then added, "But I hope we remember something important. Success is never built alone. Every step forward in life is built on the shoulders of those who came before us. Escaping where you came from does not mean forgetting the people who gave you their everything to help you stand. The room was silent. Even the waiters had paused mid-step, their trays hovering in the air. I looked directly at Samantha, not with hatred, not even with anger, but with a calm steadiness that pierced through her pride. I may have lived a modest life, but it was filled with purpose. And sometimes the quiet lives carry the greatest strength. For a moment, she tried to hold my gaze, but her eyes fell to the floor, and she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Daniel stood suddenly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He turned to me, his voice breaking. "Mom, I didn't know. I should have." His words caught in his throat, thick with guilt. "I should have stopped that joke. I should have defended you." I smiled softly, even as tears threatened to rise. "Daniel, I didn't do any of this for recognition. I did it because I wanted you to have a better life. I didn't need a spotlight, but sometimes life has a way of shining one on us when it's time." His eyes glistened, and he lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Mom." The room stirred again, but this time it wasn't with laughter. It was with admiration, with respect. I could hear the tone of the whispers changing. "She's incredible. No wonder he's successful. Look at her strength. That's what real class looks like." Samantha tried to recover. She forced a laugh and said loudly, "Well, I guess surprises are what make life interesting, right?" But her voice cracked, and no one laughed with her. The guests' eyes didn't linger on her anymore. They lingered on me. The spotlight she craved had shifted, and it wasn't coming back. I handed the microphone back to the host, not needing to say anything more. The message was clear, and it didn't need embellishment. The music started again, but the atmosphere was different now. People approached me, shaking my hand, congratulating me, complimenting my strength. Some admitted they had misjudged me. I accepted their words politely, but I wasn't there for their validation. As I moved back to my table, Daniel walked with me, his hand on my shoulder protectively, almost as if trying to shield me from the judgment that had already disappeared. For the first time in years, I felt him truly see me, not just as his mother, but as a woman of my own worth. Samantha stayed seated, staring at her glass, silent, her face still pale. She had wanted the night to humiliate me, but instead, it had humbled her. The climax of the evening wasn't my reveal as an investor. It was the truth that wealth and class are not the same thing. Money can buy chandeliers and gowns, but dignity, sacrifice, and grace are priceless. And that night, every single person in that room finally understood the difference. For me, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was simply justice. The kind of justice that doesn't need to be shouted, only lived. I left the stage with my head high, not because I owned the venue, but because I owned my story. And for the first time, so did everyone else. When the party began winding down, I slipped away from the spotlight and found a quiet corner near the exit. Guests were still buzzing about the reveal, their voices carrying little fragments of my name, as though it had suddenly become something powerful. I didn't linger in their praise. I've lived long enough to know that admiration born from shock fades quickly. What mattered most to me was not the whispers of strangers, but the look on my son's face. Daniel came to me after most of the guests had left the dance floor. His eyes were heavy, his shoulders tense, and his voice carried the weight of guilt. He reached for my hands, gripping them tightly. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't even know what to say. All these years, I thought you lived so simply because you had no choice. I never realized how strong, how wise, how careful you were with everything. I let Samantha's words slide tonight, and I hate myself for it. You deserved better." I looked at him, my heart aching, but not with anger, with love. He was still my son, the boy I raised, the boy who held my hand on his first day of school, the boy who cried when he scraped his knees, the man who still carried pieces of that child inside him. I squeezed his hands and smiled. "Daniel," I said, "I didn't save, invest, and work all those years so people would admire me. I did it so you would never feel the fear of losing everything, the fear I lived with when your father passed away. I wanted you to live free from that shadow. If I never told you, it wasn't because I was hiding it. It was because I wanted you to succeed on your own terms, not because of what I could give you." He blinked back tears, and for the first time that evening, he seemed small again, like a boy who realized just how much his mother had carried for him. "I should have defended you," he whispered. I shook my head gently. There will always be people who test your dignity. The important thing is not how others see me, but how you see me. Tonight was not about shame. It was about truth, and the truth has a way of coming out when it needs to. Samantha approached us later, her face pale, her steps uncertain. She opened her mouth, but her words stumbled. Evelyn, I didn't mean... I stopped her with a calm raise of my hand. Samantha, you don't need to explain. I heard exactly what you meant. Maybe tonight will remind you that mocking where someone comes from only shows how small you feel inside. I hope you learn from this, because kindness lasts longer than any party or dress. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing more. She turned away, clutching her glass with shaking fingers. For once, she didn't have the last word. As the evening ended, I walked out into the cool night air. The music and laughter were fading behind me, but in my chest, there was a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. I was free. On the drive home, I thought about the years of struggle, the nights of exhaustion, the moments when I doubted myself. Every sacrifice, every choice, every lesson had brought me to this moment, not to prove myself to the world, but to remind me of who I had always been. That night, I realized something important. Wealth is not measured in money or property. Wealth is measured in dignity, resilience, and love. True wealth is in the strength to endure humiliation with grace, the wisdom to know when to speak and when to stay silent, and the ability to rise when others hope you'll stay down. People will always underestimate the quiet ones. They'll laugh, they'll dismiss, they'll overlook. But quiet does not mean weak. Quiet often means powerful, steady, and unshakable. I know Samantha will remember that night for the rest of her life, not because she wore a glittering dress, not because the venue sparkled, but because she tried to humiliate me and ended up humiliating herself. And maybe, just maybe, she'll learn the value of humility. As for Daniel, I believe this was a turning point for him too. Sometimes children forget the sacrifices of their parents until life forces them to remember. I don't need his guilt. I only need his respect. And that night, I saw the spark of it return in his eyes. I went to bed that evening not as the owner of a venue or the subject of gossip, but as a woman who had faced cruelty and walked through it with dignity intact. And that, more than any investment or title, is the kind of legacy I want to leave behind. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: never measure someone's worth by their clothes, their house, or their bank account. Measure it by their heart, their sacrifices, and their strength. Respect costs nothing, but it means everything. And the next time you're tempted to laugh at someone's past, remember, you might not know the full story. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories and comment below where you're watching from. I love connecting with you all.